Money is something we all deal with, but how many of us truly understand it? What if you could make better decisions with your money? Decisions that secure your future, protect your family, and bring you peace of mind. I'm Darren Jacobs, and I'm here to help you make sense of your dollars. Welcome to Dollars and Cents, the show that breaks down the financial world in ways that matter to you. No jargon, no confusion, just real conversations about money, your money. So join me every Wednesday at 10 a.m. on WESN for Dollars and Cents.
Are you driven, ambitious, and ready to earn? WESN, the content capital, is expanding, and we're looking for dynamic media sales executives to join our team. Sell powerful advertising solutions across television, digital, and social media platforms, and help brands tell their story. If you have strong communication skills, a passion for sales, and the drive to succeed, join WESN today. Send your CV to marketing@wsncc.com or WhatsApp 68-61662 and start building your future.
WESN.
Good morning, this is Talking Point. I'm sure Michael Small, and the ongoing story with regards to the young child in Tobago is unfortunately not resolved, and forgive me for fearing for the worst. As much as you might think it is a foregone conclusion at this point, it's not necessarily a pleasant consideration. Reportedly, 6 suspects are now in police custody, including the parents, the driver of a vehicle, and I think other people potentially connected to the parents. I can't. The situation is unfortunate because at the end of the day, the narrative is things are not adding up, something doesn't make sense. The Chief Secretary is voicing his public lamentation, sorrow, anger. And I guess what makes it hit a little bit harder is Tobago has a significantly small amount of crime in Trinidad. And it's one thing to have a little bit of spillover with the gang violence. And it's another thing to have a domestic situation. But this is a child, and the circumstances are difficult to reconcile, in part because, as the Chief Sec said, something does not sit right. We have a right to be damn vexed about how this is unfolding and the Nancy stories that are being peddled. From the outside looking in, one of the things I wonder is this just the case of parents dropping the ball for a moment and the child, unfortunately, ends up in a bad situation that it does not have the capabilities to get itself out of, himself? Or is there something more? As the Chief Secretary said, a nation is judged by how it protects its most vulnerable. There can be no peace, no comfort, and no closure until answers are found. And unfortunately, that might be the most we could hope for. Because in the grand scheme of things, This might sound callous. The survival of the child is important, yes, but in the grand scheme of things, the understanding why it happened, to ensure that this situation, the set of circumstances that brought it about, will not be repeated again, is even more important, because it speaks to potentially the risk for children in similar situations, at the very least, if not all children of this country, down the line, moving forward. So, it seems as though the search efforts, I guess it's more search and recovery than search and rescue, but you never know. Keep your fingers crossed. It's just one of those things again, exactly, because it's not just the how, it's the why. Why did this happen? And what the Chief Sec, the sentiment he expressed, because I think there will be people who might believe he's playing to the cameras or trying to play politics. Now, in this situation, there's no political opponent for him to go after. And I understand his sentiments because it very much is in line of sentiments I've had in the past. And perhaps this is just one of those situations where, since I am not there, and there's a level of emotional insulation, I don't know if my brain wants to cross that line and it's preventing me. But what he said applies across the board, not just for children. He said the most vulnerable, a nation is judged how it protects, how it safeguards, how it takes care of the most vulnerable. And I feel as though we take that for granted. We kind of understand it, right? Because when the elderly or children are victims of crime, you know, people voice sadness and how could this happen and so on and so on. But I mean, just take the situation yesterday with the traffic pileup for the eye surgery, where you had elderly people, I use that term loosely, seeking free surgeries, in part because, and this is the best part, because one of the daily newspapers, The Express, has a telling photo. Everybody has one eye patch on. Now, I'm not too sure exactly if that had anything to do with, how to explain this. It was waiting after surgery. The point is they only got surgery on one eye. So I don't know if that was the process for some of the patients, but in the article, basically what was expressed for a lot of the individuals was, well, they got one eye sorted out in the public health system and then they had to wait. And they've been waiting to try and sort out their other eye. And on one hand, that's a very kind of brutal economic way to look at it. Well, you're not blind, so we have to prioritize those who have both eyes still in trouble. And you kind of understand that in a way, but at the same time, and this is one of the limitations of a public health system that is potentially overburdened and will probably be more overburdened as people could less afford private health care. But the issue is, of course, the people who had one eye dealt with by the public health system and were waiting for a slot for their other eye. That's the point, they were waiting. To what extent was the waiting kind of taken for granted? And of course, we had a whole conversation towards the end of the show yesterday with regards to people with pensions. The assumption, the working assumption is that we're not talking about people trying to mama guide the system. And that was a clear example of, I don't think there was any sort of intentional callousness. It was just a combination of factors that came together. It wasn't as though the person in the office who they were speaking to, it was that employee's master plan to cut off their NIS or their pension and then to give them the runaround when they came to ask about it. No, there were circumstances that restricted the money, and then there are circumstances that caused the staff to treat the manner in which they did. Part of it is they might not even necessarily know what to say or what to do or how best to help. Part of it is we have poor customer service. Part of it is they just might think, oh, these old people are grumpy and frumpy and I don't want to deal with them, which is not the correct thing, of course. How we treat with kids, we just depend on police in schools. Tranquility is in the papers. Multi-sectoral team headed to tranquility. As part of its special psychosocial intervention and education engagement program aimed at reducing and eradicating violence and indiscipline in schools, the Ministry of Homeland Security has continued collaborating with the Ministry of Education and other state agencies. And this is speaking directly with regards to a response to the incident when a Port of Spain alderman was physically beaten by students of Tranquility. It'll include psychologists, social workers, counselors, criminologists, police officers, prison officers, sporting personalities, representatives of the NPTA, medical doctors, and religious leaders. That's 10 different stakeholder groups. Now, the violence on an alderman is not the worst thing I have heard coming out of Tranquility. And the response for the worst thing I've heard coming out of Tranquility was nowhere close to this. And all I will say is that, from what I understand, the response takes what the Chief Secretary said with regards to being judged by how we take care of our most vulnerable. Yeah. No one was really looking to take care of the most vulnerable in that situation. And I'm not talking about a situation where young boys were fighting amongst each other. No, the victims were very different to that, and the crime perpetrator was very different to that. Well, technically, it might not be a crime. Then again, too many people studying the wrong things. One of the issues is the most vulnerable will see how they're being treated. Now, for the elderly, we might not necessarily face practical consequences, although one would think God is watching. But with children, how often do you hear the stories of adults who might have some deviant behavior themselves were victims, oftentimes of similar, if not the same, deviance? Whether it's domestic violence, whether it's psychological abuse, whatever their parents did to them or some authority figure did to them, they might end up doing to others. Of course, you could go further. One of the issues is trickle-down economics is a funny thing, right? It doesn't always work, I get that. Particularly if you expect, oh, the savings or the dividends or the whatever will trickle down from big business. Yes and no. Some of it will trickle down, but it won't seem substantial or it won't seem obvious. And how it trickle down might not be what we want. It might not trickle down in terms of lower prices or cost savings for consumers or higher wages. It might trickle down, though, in terms of things like more investment, more jobs. Whether they're good jobs or not, there'll be more jobs. But other things trickle down from an economy if you look at a wider scope. The economic hardships are already affecting the NGOs that deal with people that are on the margins of society. And they're already affecting one vulnerable or somewhat vulnerable group like the LGBTQ community, which is in a weird place when it comes to Trinidad, right? I myself, some sociologists probably should legitimately just study the phenomenon of how we treat with that, or don't, or mistreat. And the economic challenges are already starting to affect programs for people that face certain challenges, certain stigmas, certain assumptions, stereotypes, etc., etc. And at some point, if the economy goes too far off the rails, it will start to affect other things more than they are now. Because one could make the case that part of the reason the situation in schools are out of control is that the Ministry of Education being under-resourced for a significant period of time, and I believe this may have started long before the Keith Rowley administration. They just were unable to fix it. And it's continuing, most likely. And a failing education system is then providing an environment that's causing a failure of development of young people. And that failure is then giving us the results in the outcomes of these young people that we see before us today. And it's not the only thing. I think one of the mistakes people make is they want to say, I know what the problem is, and then they'll state something similar to what I just stated, and then they want to say, that is the problem. No, that is not the entirety of the problem, but that is a factor, that is a contributor. Now, to what extent it contributes, I can't say, but I believe that it is contributing significantly enough. And similar to what I said yesterday, if you see a grandparent get mistreated by a government bureaucratic system with regards to their pension, what about if you think they're getting mistreated from a healthcare system, a public healthcare system, or a private one? It all comes back down to, for those that are struggling, because they're going to be hit with more body blows from life. And the source of those body blows are not just going to be random, natural weather phenomenon. It's going to be the society. It's going to be the society telling them no. It's going to be society telling them they can't have opportunities. It's going to be the society telling them, well, we don't have health care for you. We don't have health care for your sick grandparents or your sick elderly aunt or uncle. I mean, I know of a case where someone I know that had a condition, she passed away. The question was, did she pass away while receiving reasonable levels of health care to try to stave off her condition, or was there some amount of negligence involved? We'll never know. I know two cases where I have those questions. If I could have those questions, other people could have similar questions, and they might be less patient or less tolerant. There are symptoms with regards to the economy, depending on how you interpret the signs. Truckers are complaining about improper sanitation aboard the cargo vessel Blue Wave Harmony. toilets have not been functioning for the last 2 months. Running water is described as scarce, and this is not a 3-hour boat ride. There are portable toilets on the vessel. 2, just 2. I don't know how many people would be on that boat. I don't know if 2 portable toilets are enough, because you're there for quite a few hours. Of course, this now treads on a different aspect of the situation with the chief sec, or rather I would say a different aspects of politics. Because the newly minted leader of the PNM Tobacco Council points out, where's the chief sec's complaints about this? One can reasonably make a case or reasonably have the expectation that if the elections didn't work out the way that they did, or if this happened a couple years earlier before the election, the chief sec might be all over this situation, questioning how this could happen and blaming the government. Now, this one is borderline, but one could argue the situation with the NGC. If the situation with the NGC happened a couple of years ago under the PNM's watch, you probably would have had the Prime Minister, Minister Padaraf, Minister Roberts, amongst others, leading the charge to publicly crucify the PNM. And I'm not saying that the PNM should be publicly, calling for the crucifixion of the UNC. But what I am saying is, why do they not want to level with us and leave us asking questions? The big question, of course, being, well, you cut all the sponsorships, and all of a sudden, it seems as though you're trying to reverse Moody's. It's one of those things where, when there's a breakup, and somebody breaks up with you, but you want to tell your friends, no, I broke up with him or her. Really now? All of a sudden, it was your choice. No. We had to realign our strategic vision. Moody's was not aligned with how we operate. The other credit rating agencies, unless this was a major mistake by Moody's, I won't be surprised if slowly the other credit rating agencies would start to downgrade the NGC as well for similar reasons. Maybe not necessarily the exact same. But the NGC is not the first entity where we have questions, or at least I. WASA is another one. How do those two things, WASA and the NGC, connect to what I'm saying, protecting the most vulnerable? Well, WASA is the availability of water. Water availability seems to be one of those issues where a lot of games are played. Games are being played in Tobago right now. Now, it's one thing to play games with businesses, which will affect the jobs of the employees, by the way, but I guess no one cares about that. No, let's milk as much money out of a struggling industry as we can, because we is a government utility, and they is just beneath us, apparently. No, but then if those businesses close down, how many of those employees now potentially might be supporting their households? Don't know. Or maybe they're living on their own. Same difference. They're still at least supporting themselves. And then to what extent are the most vulnerable being caught up in the crossfire of water availability? How many elderly people throughout the country has had issues with water availability? How many children, they have an issue with going to school because the uniforms can't be cleaned, they can't bathe, and yet, what are the parents supposed to do? Buy bottled water? And of course, the NGC sponsored cultural and sporting events. So now when you want to send a multi-sectoral team into schools like Tranquility, where students are acting out, for whatever reason, it doesn't matter, they are acting out. So you're going through the range of expertise, right? Not just police and criminologists, but social workers, psychologists, counselors, and sporting personalities. The Ministry of Homeland Security has basically directly identified, one, the power of sport, two, the power of sporting personalities. But let's cut sports sponsorship now. Yeah, let's do that. That'll work out. Sporting programs and music programs have at times been the very vehicle to try to instill a sense of discipline and shore up the tools for young people's development by giving them a different type of outlet to focus on, a different kind of exercise to partake in, and a different kind of activity that is not necessarily based on academics per se, that could potentially motivate them to try when society has potentially beaten all the motivation out of them otherwise. I mean, I've already at least once or twice spoken on this show about how certain cities in various countries utilize sports programs to keep young people off the streets. But one of the things that any sort of neighborhood sport requires is something to inspire them. Heroes to look up to. Athletes to emulate. Do we really have that here? Who are our heroes here? Because when you emulate the athletes on the field, psychologically, a part of you will also tend to emulate the athletes off the field. When you see how they carry themselves, if you want to take your sport, if you love your sport, if you take it seriously, if you see the athlete acting professionally, you're going to act out like a fool? And then now, the sponsorship into various programs that are higher than school level, right, provide opportunities for them to climb a ladder, for them to progress in sports. And if we had some sort of healthy professional system, something to aspire to at least locally. If not, depending on the sport, aspire to be an athlete in a foreign league for a foreign club. And those types of stories, we don't need 100 per generation to go out and play in India, play cricket in India, play rugby in Australia, you know, play basketball in the United States. We don't need, or wherever around the world, we don't need hundreds and hundreds of our young people going abroad and excelling in sports. We just need a few. But it has to be consistent. The consistency proves to our young people, no, if you try, the window of opportunity is always open to those that really want to seek it out. But if we're kind of half-baking it, sometimes on, sometimes off, if we don't show consistency, then they won't take it seriously. They'll take other things seriously. Professional sports is a meat grinder anyway, no matter where you go. But other societies has used it as a way to motivate students. And here's the key. Most aren't going to go pro. But what will happen is most might get a scholarship, partial, full. Most it might help get them accepted into university. We can't take it for granted that we have enough money to fund GATE for every single graduate of our secondary school system. The more that our people could get opportunities, let them have it. We don't necessarily have a set of sports scholarships in our local tertiary education system as far as I'm aware, not to the degree, of course, to foreign nations. But that also is something to strive for. I mean, playing college sports is not a small thing. And if you're really good, it's no longer a cheap thing either. But we don't necessarily think things through. I'm not saying, of course, that you can't cut the funding, the sponsorship if necessary, but the explanation isn't really there, is it? So what's going on with the NGC? Because it's not just about the individual athletes who are affected by the sponsorship being cut today. It is a reduction in the programs available that will reduce the footprint of sport on a whole in the country, that will then reduce the amount of tools in the toolbox, the amount of arrows in the quiver, to tackle this situation of how do you influence young people ethically away from bad behavior. You can't beat it out of them, and you can't bribe them. And heavens forbid, you can't really blackmail them. And a lot of them won't necessarily take any sort of intimidation tactic seriously. They've already figured out themselves the flaws in the systems that we're trying to suppress the school violence with. Exhibit A, an alderman was beaten. Some random adults. They didn't even pause, apparently. The most vulnerable. Who is the most vulnerable? And what does that mean? How far will we go to protect the most vulnerable? I fear that the accountants, the wrong kind of accountants, the bean counters, are arbitrarily putting a price on human life. They might not even realize it. But whether it is the education system, the public health system, the national security system, all of these things in various ways is putting a price tag on what is the value of a human life, what is the value of opportunities for proper human development, what is the value of life-saving or quality of life healthcare, what is the value of security apparatus and rescue services and emergency responses. And I get it. Now is not the time where we are flush with cash and we could just spend a set on all of these things. What comes, therefore, to manage such a conundrum is leadership. Do we have that? Because so many things seemingly look bad at the same time. And if you're willing to just accept it, the lack of leadership will continue. Let's hit the pause button. We take a break here. We'll come back maybe with the media ambassador. I did speak to ASP Arun. He did indicate his hope that he'll be able to come today, but we'll see if he's here soon. If not, the conversation continues. There's an update on one of the stories that I hope will not die. I fear that the public would prefer to move on, and that would bother me if that is the actual truth behind the matter, but we'll see. Stay tuned. This is Talking About the WSN, the Content Capital. We'll be right back after this.
If these walls could talk, they'd cry uncle. They didn't plan to become offices or yoga studios. But they've stood by us, even when we got a little stir-crazy. For that, they deserve some thanks. They deserve Benjamin Moore.
Stroke is a leading cause of death and disability worldwide. Globally, 1 in 4 adults over the age of 25 will have a stroke in their lifetime.
Usually you would then have a conversation with the relatives, let them know exactly what's the status, what you were thinking.
We are not really ignoring them. We are acting on the patient at hand, after which we tend to communicate to them.
Yeah.
Are you driven, ambitious, and ready to earn? WESN, the content capital, is expanding, and we're looking for dynamic media sales executives to join our team. Sell powerful advertising solutions across television, digital, and social media platforms, and help brands tell their story. If you have strong communication skills, a passion for sales, and the drive to succeed, join WESN today. Send your CV to marketing@wsncc.com or WhatsApp 6861662 and start building your future.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
In this day of stay-at-home and work from home, home has never meant more than it does today. Whether you're looking to buy, rent, or build your new home, now is the time to get going. Gittins & Gittins real estate agents are here to take you to that place of your dreams. Let us take you home. We help you find that rental to rest along the way, or journey with you to find your home destination. Investors and commercial enterprises too. Call us and we'll walk the distance to place your business in just the right location. Owners, leave the headaches to us. We'll find your tenants or buyers while you stay at home. We'll even manage your property at your bidding. Anything real estate, come home to Gittins & Gittins Real Estate. Call us at 760-3280 or 747-1220 or visit us at 16 Fifth Street in Woodbrook.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
The home of Caribbean content is growing and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. as we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation. Contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
Hi, I am Emiliana Beechan and I am a mental health and conflict resolution consultant. Welcome to Mind Matters, the show where we explore the intricate world of mental health and the art of conflict resolution. Join us as we hear from mental health professionals, conflict resolution experts, and everyday people who have transformed their lives through understanding and communication. Mind Matters, WESN Content Capital.
I'm back here. I'm talking about the WSN Content Capital Show. Michael Small. Unfortunately, our media ambassador still cannot join us. And I guess at this point, what I will do is I will ask for prayers for ASP Arun. I don't know how serious it is, but it is something that unfortunately he did not, as far as I'm aware, it wasn't as though he was being careless or he neglected himself, but he still wasn't 100%. Yesterday, he saw treatment, and this morning, again, not 100%, looking to seek treatment again. We pray for him. We hope that this is nothing serious relative to whatever his pre-existing conditions are. Pray for his family as well. ASP Arun is a dedicated police officer who, up until very recently, when he would speak about his work week, it would include working at nights over the weekend, not just on weekdays. And I fear I'm not saying that we should discourage police officers from being that dedicated to duty, but at what cost? One could argue that perhaps who is our most vulnerable? Maybe sometimes, under the right circumstances, even police officers might be considered the most vulnerable, because the expectations that we have for them, the expectations that the job has for them, that the calling has for them, that's all understandable, especially now, when you are devoted to duty. It's not as though you could just say no and put it off like a normal job. So it is a heavy thing to consider the fact that, you know, the job is serious enough that there's people depending on you in serious enough circumstances that you're willing to work this hard physically. And they have been, maybe not so much now, although I guess with one of the daily newspapers closing down, this is one thing editorially, each newspaper might have had a different focus. And if my memory serves correct, a lot of these stories that would actually inform us about the passing of officers in non-confrontational circumstances, non-violent circumstances, for medical reasons and the like, it came from, if my memory serves correct, it came from the Newsday. And now, depending if no other media house editorially takes up that baton to report on these unfortunate circumstances, we might not know how many officers are passing away because they have a heart condition they didn't see about, or they had diabetes they didn't see about, you know, or they had something that they ignored and it turned into something extremely serious, which I know anecdotally happens with normal people who lead normal jobs, who have a significantly higher degree of time away from work and thus would have time to sort themselves out. I know that it happens. I've heard of some stories. I heard of one story just this weekend about a man whose health was so bad and seemingly he chose to neglect it until he died in his 40s or maybe 50s. But I think with police officers, it's a little bit different. The drive to work, it's a different type of animal. It's commendable, but I wouldn't necessarily say we should discourage it, but maybe we should find a way to encourage a healthier balance. I shudder to think of what happens after officers who pass away under such circumstances, how society treats those situations moving forward. Case in point, let's go with the first story. This is more like a minor update with regards to the Joshua Samaru killing. The TTPS, basically, they are more or less completed according to reports with regards to their investigation. They just need something from forensics before they could send it off to the DPP's office. This is one of those things where, one, I do wonder to what extent the public has moved on, whether it is just a callous disinterest or whether it's because, you know, psychologically you don't necessarily want to keep remembering certain things because it's obviously unpleasant. It's obviously upsetting. But while it's easier to kind of ignore it and push it to the side, that's the whole reason why that phrase, never forget, no matter how unpleasant, upsetting, no matter how much you might want to move on from it and not live in the past, so to speak. Well, the victims don't have that choice. And more importantly, similar to what I said about the search for the missing toddler, it's not just about seeking justice in this situation, whatever that justice may be. Seeking justice for the young lady who's paralyzed, whatever that justice may be. But it's also about finding out why did this happen in order to prevent anything similar from occurring again. That's important because I do wonder if people don't understand the potential implications of this case. And I fear that details in the investigation, motives ascribed, and potential reasons to justify the situation might make the narrative worse, not better. But that's just a concern I have, speculation I have. But at the end of the day, it comes back to the point the Chief Sec made. We will be judged by how we treat our most vulnerable. And regardless of what your criminal record is, when two nations are at war, you're fighting for, at least in the past, the survival of your nation. Right? People could say in hindsight who would have won or would not have won World War II. But when you're in it, you are essentially fighting to see which nation will survive and which nation will suffer the consequences. And even in that situation, when your hands are up, mortal enemies, but once the hands go up and you try to surrender, the nations of the world, at least those involved at the time, basically acknowledge you have to treat that surrender a certain way. You have to respect that. With regards to law enforcement and interacting with civilians, one could argue it's even more defined. It's even more serious of a situation. I mean, shooting a surrendered prisoner, technically, as far as I'm aware, is a war crime. Shooting a surrendering suspect, as far as I'm aware, is a crime. At least it's a crime in most jurisdictions. And the thing about surrender is you make yourself vulnerable. You stop doing anything that might be resisting or perceived as resisting. And by making yourself vulnerable, you are at the mercy of whoever it is you're surrendering to. And it's one thing if it was a gang war and you're trying to surrender to your rival gangster and they don't want to accept. That's fine. That's criminal behavior. Now, when there's a video that implies law enforcement is doing it. Because how we treat our most vulnerable, how we treat surrendering suspects. I mean, it will inform, as I've said before, how other suspects will then interpret and interact with this sort of situation. You might disagree with me. But all I would ask is that we get some detailed information as to what happened. Even if you, let me not say that. Let me not say that. I hope one day I will not be used to all the killing. Now, to expand on a point I was making yesterday, because again, the people who pulled the trigger in this situation were police officers. Now, of course, the Social and Welfare Association, they are happy for the increase in manpower, saying that they have had a shortage. Right? The demand for police officers has increased. There are multiple units that have to constantly be replenished. There are going to be retirements from the service. So there's that challenge. It makes the numbers, I don't know if the math is going to math, if the HR function could keep up with demands. But the head of the association, he had something that he said, and I do wonder if we're kind of taking for granted how easy it is to accomplish. We want police officers, quote, who are able to serve and serve professionally with devotion. And I fear now, we get good officers because at the end of the day, the human spirit, there will be those that will rise to the challenge. That have that sense of duty, that even if society does not really put in a lot of effort to foster that sense of civic responsibility, they will still have it in some form or another, and they'll find a way to serve. Not all of them will find their way to the police force. Some of them have. Now, if you want to increase the recruitment numbers, how are we going to find the ones who have that right mindset that Inspector Pitt, ASP Pitt, pointed out? We want police officers who are able to serve and serve professionally with devotion. That's three different things. One speaks to their ability, and the other two speaks to their character and behavior. But this is the problem. That sense of civic responsibility. We need that sense of devotion and the capacity, the understanding, the willingness, the tolerance to be professional. We need that with regards to nurses and doctors. We need that with regards to teachers. We need that with regards to fire service officers. We need that for CSRs in various public facing bureaucratic positions that deal with various issues the public might have with government services. We need that in a lot of other places. Yes, the police service arguably, you could argue, is a priority, but we need that across the board. Now the question is, are we really doing enough to develop that in our society? Because I would argue the answer to that question is no. And the proof in that pudding comes back to the fact that, A, people don't want to be involved. People don't want to risk their neck. People don't want to stand up. People don't want to speak out. Because if in our society we do not foster a sense of civic responsibility in general, we're not really going to get enough candidates for these types of vocational jobs that bear such a heavy burden of responsibility for our nation and our nation's future. We're not going to get that just so. It's not just all about reading, writing, arithmetic, sciences, business subjects, even vocational disciplines. School violence reflects a lacking in the development of our young people. I don't necessarily want to say it's a lacking in our young people, but they're still developing. We're not doing something right. Yes, parents have part of the responsibility as well. But then we have to ask ourselves, why does it seem like so many parents are shirking their responsibility? Because if it was a minority of parents, it's a them problem. But if statistically it's closer to a large minority, or maybe even the majority, if it's that widespread, I'm sorry, it's a we problem, and we means the wider society, and we means the government of the day. Previous government might have failed. That's fine. We can acknowledge that. Acknowledging that ain't solving the problem. What are we going to do to solve the problem? More police officers. It's not going to solve the problem. But anyway, I mean, that's what they're doing in Tranquility. They're not saying they're going to put more police in Tranquility to deal with the school violence. Yeah, police will be involved. Police is one of 10 different groups of professionals being involved in Tranquility. That was reported. Let's move on to the next topic there to get to today. This one, I guess, on some level, how surprising is it? It's described as a corruption racket at the Immigration Division. Millions of dollars is said to have been paid over the years for citizenship, residency permits, work permits, and passport appointments. This is coming from the Minister of Homeland Security. And he says it outright. The racket has been operating for several years undetected because of a lack of oversight, accountability, and transparency. This is not something that is new or a revelation to me. I question the accountability in the Ministry of National Security and all the various protective services and arms of national security that operate under its umbrella. I've heard some things about the former Minister of National Security and to what extent he was being irresponsible, let me just put it that way. Or being unethical, let me just put it that way. Right? To whatever the degree that is, I've heard a few things. It is technically rumor, I'm not going to state it. But when you look at the results with regards to how the Coast Guard was operating, the prison service at the time was operating, the police service at the time was operating, the defense force on a whole, the regiment was operating, accountability was not showing up in the results. The results suggested a lack of accountability. So is it surprising? If you figure that out Is it surprising there's a lack of oversight and accountability in immigration? If the Coast Guard could seemingly neglect its duties for the better part of at least 2 terms in office, we couldn't even secure our maritime borders during a public health crisis where we locked down our borders and denied our own people the right to return home. The Coast Guard couldn't even do its job properly then. And the government of the day didn't say anything about it. Leads me to think that they swept it on the rug. Heard a lot of Mama Guy, Nancy stories about the Coast Guard, but nothing substantial to explain why the results are lacking, to say the least. So, officials charging $90,000 and upwards for residency papers and work permits in the country. Foreign nationals, Chinese nationals, reportedly constructing homes for officials in North Trinidad in exchange for TNT residency. What most likely happened was bureaucracy is slow. Bureaucracy is slow, so you do something to grease the wheels. You're not greasing the wheels so that things that shouldn't fall out. You're greasing the wheels just to get the machine moving in the manner that it's supposed to be moving. Get the machine moving in the direction that it was already moving. It's just moving too slow. So we'll help it move in that direction. So you grease the wheels a little bit. And then somebody else has a similar situation. They grease the wheels. And then somebody else greases the wheels. And then eventually, somebody figures out, hey, no one is monitoring the application of all this grease. No one is monitoring when we backdoor things into the system, when we manually edit things and make changes we're not supposed to make, and push things through in a manner that technically we're not supposed to do. Now we're doing it as favors, as minor favors, because at the end of the day, this person has all of the paperwork, has gone through the process. The process is just moving so slow at a snail's pace. We're just pushing the process along. But we could use the same tools and mechanisms to hand out favors to people that might not qualify. Now, maybe it's a family member. They didn't qualify, but that's not fair, that's not right. They need a help. This is their chance. They're trying to make something of themselves, whatever it is. You know? So then you justify breaking the rules. Face it was just, we're moving things along. They were going to get it eventually anyway. What's the matter with them getting it sooner? Then we're justifying breaking the rules because, hey, I know this person, I know that person, I like their story, they deserve this, what's the harm? And then eventually someone figures out, I put enough grease into the system, enough incentives, enough consideration, or I demand. Because now there is no justification, there is no just give people a chance. I'm looking to break the rules for profit. And because of that, I could demand a much bigger price, much more grease. And then thus, corruption can easily be born from an ease of doing business situation. Maguette Wade from Senegal, she vehemently believes this is one of the major causes, if not the cause of corruption in African nations, because the ease of doing business is so bad, it just encourages people to break the rules just to get by, and then once that floodgate is open, maintaining law and order is near impossible. Because who is going to sort through which rule-breaking situation is reasonable and justified and which one is not? Because once you start to look into the matter, you kind of have to acknowledge the illegality of it all and deal with it all, or none at all, because you then would be tainted. And this is the problem with a lack of oversight. Now, one thing with the current government of the day, I haven't necessarily seen signs that the lack of accountability and oversight continued to the same extent that we saw the signs, or I saw the signs, in the previous administration. Now, the police service didn't really see an improvement there, to be honest, with regards to the questionable behaviors you see from the service on a whole. Whatever criticism you had of the service, you probably still have. That's more or less what I'm saying there, right? But we've seen the Coast Guard, at least in one instance, step up its game. We've seen the government go after police officers with PDOs, prison service officers with PDOs, and I do believe they may have also gone after soldiers in the regiment. And now with this situation with the immigration division, and one of the things that I appreciate, look, Alexander said there was also a history of the immigration division not taking instructions from the ministry. It's very easy to just throw the situation under the bus, throw your predecessor under the bus. But he's not looking, at least based on what I've read, and maybe he'll find a way to do so if he hasn't already at a later date. But so far, what I've read in the report, it's not about the politics. He is just going after a situation that he finds is wrong. And to be honest, I would agree with that assessment, obviously, as simplistic as it is. Quote, this department was a disaster waiting to happen, rotten to the core. There were persons who were deliberately not passing on the instructions and information to the immigration department. We have information where foreign persons were blocked from entering the country, and we are investigating who they were acting on behalf of. Calling it a flagrant abuse of power and affected services provided to taxpayers. More efforts were underway, according to the minister, not only to root out corruption, but also to modernize the system through the implementation of e-passports. Now, it could be, this is one of the things, a shake-up can cause instability. But one of the benefits of a shake-up is, all of a sudden, the tools and mechanisms and unsecured breach points into the system that pre-existing corruption were using might unintentionally or intentionally be cut off, be closed. So one of the things of wanting to go to the e-passport system could have been, if it wasn't already known and exposed, to further expose or to reveal what was going on. Because you're changing the thing wholesale now. And it's not easy because people, once corrupt people, most corruption doesn't know when to stop. You got away with it for so long, you'll never get caught, right? In this situation, I'm grateful for that human psychological feeling where you think it won't happen to me. No, it doesn't matter how smart you are, you're not smart enough to be immune to prosecution, to escape detection perfectly. Right, and this is a situation where the minister has even pointed out that apparently some individuals, I believe in this department, believe they had the upper hand and were trying to determine what information police possessed. The implication, of course, with regards to trying to interfere with or, get ahead of the investigation. So this is a big story. This story, to me, is more important than any of the political bacchanal in the last, I don't know how many other weeks. It is another significant win for the government and for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And what makes it better is, it's not about politics here. It's not about who to blame, and then all of a sudden we focus on that. Because I do believe that if the minister started to say things about what the PNM did or didn't do, if that, I mean, listen, maybe if you do it down the line, it's fine. But if he started off that way, the story would not be about what they were able to do to potentially clean up alleged corruption. I'll say that because it hasn't, gone through the court to convict anybody yet. What the government has done to clean up alleged corruption. That's what the story should be about. And by keeping the politics out of it, we can keep the focus there. Because the last couple of weeks, important stories, important pieces of legislation have been hidden by the bacchanal going on in Parliament. And I'm grateful that it didn't happen in this case. And I'm grateful that, at least in this instance, the government's words, the Prime Minister's words about going after corruption. Now, there can be politics behind it, but I'm not going to speculate on that. I'm going to take it for what it is, regardless of whether there was some kind of underlying political motivation or not. I don't care. If the things that the minister said were happening, did happen, I'm all for cleaning it up. Now the question is, is this going to be a blip on the radar? Is this going to be an exception to the rule? Or will we actually see something, go somewhere, get something out of this? Because there are other aspects of national security that probably needs cleaning up. And then there are other ministries, state entities, public utilities, but that's where maybe the politics might come in, but from a different slant with regards to, well, let me not taint the narrative or the conversation on this topic with that talk. Let's move on to the next topic. CARICOM has voiced concern over the Middle East hostilities, obviously. Price of oil will affect cost of living. Big issue for many of our Caribbean neighbors, and it's to some extent a big issue for us, despite the fact that we still profit from the energy sector. So, the Strait of Hormuz, CARICOM is calling for safe passage, basically an end to the Iranian blockade, I guess. They underscored that the right of transit passage through the strait is guaranteed under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. The organization stressed that this right should not be subject to licenses, levies, or authorizations, and must not be obstructed by bordering states. And that's nice. It's nice of you to say that. One of the things that I don't know to what extent I should be frustrated by it, but I get it if you're saying it because you have to say it. But this means nothing to the parties involved, because what's going on is bigger than an international treaty. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, what police force is going to go and arrest the leaders of the countries involved? Everything about international law is not like domestic law. International law is more of a guide. Domestic law for a nation is things that you cannot go against. Or at least you should not if you want your law to be respected. But international law, there is no legislative body that passed this law. It was treaties signed. And if you want to enforce it, it has to be enforced by military action. But given the fact that essentially that's what caused this whole mess in the first place, number one, and number two, they're currently fighting it out, invoking the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea is kind of redundant and meaningless at this point. One of the things moving forward, if CARICOM wants to have its opinion be respected, it needs to be concerned with the relationships it has with the rest of the world. Now the question is, can you play off both sides against each other and still demand a certain amount of respect from everyone involved. Because I would imagine there's been speculation with regards to the United States agenda on CARICOM, how they view CARICOM. Do they view CARICOM as something beneficial to the region and to U.S. interests, or do they see it as something that goes against their interests? We've speculated on that. Karen believes that on some level, the U.S. has an issue with CARICOM's agenda with regards to certain nations like the Maduro regime running Venezuela. So in light of that perspective, now CARICOM wants to invoke the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Who are they telling this to? Are they telling this to Iran, whose whole military strategy is based on interrupting trade in the Strait of Hormuz? That's literally, in their mind, this is our trump card, no pun intended, if we're attacked. This is our trump card to get what we want in whatever circumstances it's applicable. They don't care about the law of the sea. And the United States, now they're not necessarily going to stop commerce from the Strait. They retaliated by blockading Iranian vessels, blockading. Are you trying to demand that they respect the Convention on the Law of the Sea? Well, technically, they're saying we're not stopping oil tankers. We just have an issue with Iran. And Iran is the one stopping oil tankers in response. But we can't stop what we're doing. That's what they would say, right? And I would argue CARICOM is not in a position to make such a request from America or Iran. And depending on how international politics unfolds, CARICOM might find itself on the outside looking into a lot of the international community's dynamics. If that happens, then the Prime Minister will actually look quite smart and seemingly have great foresight. I would argue it's not that simple. But when the Prime Minister said, well, if they want to kick us out, let them kick us out, I thought, did you really have to say it like that? But while I can agree with the Prime Minister's points on how CARICOM is being run, or at least maybe not outright agree, but be willing to appreciate what she has to say, while not necessarily appreciating how she says it. Because I am left wondering, where is CARICOM going? And I think this, unfortunately, once again shows the issues we have when nations try to come together. One could argue if the United States wasn't one country, but rather 50 countries, each US state stayed as an independent nation, it's not as though they would easily be able to come together in any sort of unified way any easier than the European Union. You could see the fracturing of their society across various lines. A lot of it is political, or at least driven by politics. Politics gets in the way of, domestic politics gets in the way of international relations with your neighbors. And I would argue the same thing is happening with CARICOM. It's happening in the European Union. Because every state has its own agenda. Every nation has its own agenda. Every state in the United States has its own agenda. But the United States is formally a country, and that forces those states to be unified, at least to some extent. It calls them together in a way, in a more formal, stronger way than, say, the European Union does for European nations, or CARICOM does for those members of the Caribbean who are part of that community. And if you really want CARICOM to work, it requires effort, basically. It's not that dissimilar to a large group of friends, right? And if one of the friend group has its own agenda, depending on if it's not managed, it could mean the collapse of the whole friend group if the situation gets too sour. Because we've already been split before the last election, before Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar took office. She's not necessarily helping the situation, or at least not helping the perception of her own actions and decisions. But the division was there before. The questions were there before. The split agendas were there before. The limitations were there before. Now, one of the things this CARICOM kind of has to support and make mention of and push the law of the sea, because we are island nations, we are somewhat, our rights and the protection of our rights, our individual sovereign rights, is to some degree tied to a link to how the global community treats with these sort of maritime issues. But something tells me it's not just about going through the motions and saying what you have to say and putting on a brave front. If you want your message to be heard, you need to make your voice important or respectable, or at least don't be someone that the intended listener does not want to hear from. And I fear that's a position CARICOM may find itself in if it's not careful. We have a Ramon line caller. Good morning, you're on here.
Hi, good morning, Sean.
Morning, morning.
Morning, this is Arima here. Now, I just want to say to the people, the citizens of this country, you all have free cataract surgery going on. All you try and take it. There are some people, for years, they have been suffering with the cataract, right? And they have no money to get it cut, right? So all you have it free in all your hands now. All you're getting it free of charge done. All you please try and get it and make a little thing for yourself, because the eyes is important. So all you go out there, get the cataract surgery done. It have foot, it have legs. All you're getting it free of charge. All you take advantage of it, because it have people living here with one foot, right? And all you're getting foot done. Go and apply or do what all you have to do and try and get another limb. Get a foot. All you will feel so good, because all you can't pay for a foot, to buy a leg is thousands of dollars. So all you're getting it done. Go and get it Trinidad and Tobago, and bless us for that. It comes on the way. Try and get it. Please. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Yeah, I mean, it seems as though it's been heavily subscribed, right? Bringing in international doctors. They say it's the expertise, it's the technology. Technology might not be limited only to equipment, by the way, right? It's a high value technique apparently, where one of the selling points of the techniques done by this surgeon, by this leading expert, is the fact that he could successfully apparently do it, see up to 400 to 450 patients a day. And the implication is they're all potentially going to get the surgery if it's that efficient. So the public has reached out to the point where I'm not entirely sure. It caused a massive pile-up yesterday. I remember some of my friends were messaging each other because they are living in Diego Martin, so it was an issue, potentially with regards to their daily commute. I do hope everyone that needs to be seen can be seen, but caller, I mean, as much as you're calling for people to take advantage of your ability, it seemed to be heavily subscribed yesterday. I guess the thing is, perhaps I will support the caller by saying, if you were discouraged yesterday, don't be afraid to go back today. Don't be afraid to go back today and try. You know, reach out to whoever you could reach out if you need help with transportation. Don't be afraid to put in a little extra effort today and try, because the opportunity, you don't want to regret missing it. And you never know. So many people might eventually be discouraged that the lines, the amount of people that are converging there, it lessens, but not because all patients were seen and there are less cases, but rather the trail end, people just gave up. So I would say, don't give up. Because the quality of life potential to treat with a long-term issue that the public health sector will have difficulty treating with. Now, maybe with the reduced numbers, things might move easier in the long run, at least maybe in the medium or short term. In the public health center, the demand will drop, at least for now. But those who can't, those that physically are unable, I understand, I get it. But you never know. Still, ask, reach out, who you know, a nephew, a niece, a grandchild, a friend, if you don't have family. Because I agree with the caller. It's one of those things where when you think about the economy and you think about the shortages, there's no easy solution for the Ministry of Health to treat with this sort of thing. We want to have healthcare of a certain quality, free cataract surgery, fine. We want to have it available to anybody that needs it, fine. The actual capacity is not going to meet the demand. So there are going to be shortfalls, so there are going to be delays. Even if you put more money into the public health system, you're not going to be able to get away from that dynamic 100%. So those who can get it done at the Seventh-day Adventist Hospital, while this doctor is here, do so. And we'll see how long this could go. There are approximately, well, it ends on May the 26th, so there are 7 more days. Assuming May the 26th will be a working day and it'll go until whenever the office hours are. I don't know when those are. So, but take up the opportunity if you can. We have another caller from Arima. Caller, good morning.
Good morning, Sean. Good morning.
Morning.
Could I divert a little from the topic this morning?
Sure.
The People's National Movement had an event in Mandela Park on Sunday.
Yes.
The process was being rolled out over the last month, where persons who wanted to sell stuff had to apply, get authorization, pay $500, assign a booth, and first come first serve. What ended up happening on Sunday is that persons, and I know of one person in particular, was assigned booth number 9. Let us just assume it had from 1 to 50 booths. So booth number 9 was a relatively close booth to where the crowd is.
Mm-hmm.
On Saturday, they had a gathering of everybody, and everybody attended to find out exactly what is needed to be done. On Sunday, everybody was supposed to be there for 8:30, including the person who was assigned booth number 9. When they reached there, some persons from Tobago had occupied the booth. So they went to the person who was instrumental in the whole communication, and the person is saying that she cannot do anything about that. So the person who was assigned booth number 9 ended up in booth number 50. and she was unable to sell her products. So she lost her $500 because she was not selling number 9. Plus, she lost a $2,000 investment with the goods that she went to sell.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you could look into it for me and give me a feedback. You have my number. Appreciate very much, and I will listen up here.
I mean, I'll be honest, Kola, I very much doubt I'll be able to get any information on that. I have no personal connections with the party on that. I know people in the party. You know, we'll talk, maybe off the record on a few things, but to say that I'm going to get information on something like this, because the suspicion that I had when you told me the story was, because this is the stereotype of politicians. They will do, how to say, I want it done now, and you will give me what I want. And they won't necessarily care for the rules or for the bureaucracy when it comes to them. Right? We know to some extent this happened with law enforcement situations. Right? We know this, what happened with giving out favors. Right? We've heard stories, we've heard the rumors. And it would not, when she went to the person who was supposed to be in charge to some extent or to liaise on the situation, and the liaison or whatever the official function was told her there's nothing I could do about that. What I suspect happened was somebody involved themselves in something that was not their responsibility, but they were senior enough that they could not be ignored. And I'll just leave it there. Right? Who would do it? I don't know. Because I suspect it would not have been that it was some senior PNM functionary that was in charge of the event made this call, or at least made this call of their own motivation. But somebody decided to involve themselves in the situation and they didn't necessarily care who was displaced. Or it showed very poor management. Well, they reached out to take the booth or some nonsense like that. Something very irresponsible and stupid. But I'll be honest, I don't think I could ask. There are a couple of people I could call to ask. I don't think they'll tell me, to be honest. And if they do tell me, depending on the situation, I might not be able to say, because then it could be traced back to them, could get them in trouble. But I doubt they would tell me. I don't have that level of relationship with anyone in the party. Like I said, I know a few people, 1 or 2 people kind of know me, but it's not in any professional capacity, and it's not in any capacity of me being any kind of member of the PNM. So, but I think it's one of 2 things. Really bad mismanagement, I'm talking amateur level, or that sort of political patronage where you can't deny someone higher up in the hierarchy who doesn't care about what the procedure is or what the process is, who isn't going to follow the proper procedure and be accountable for proper behavior, conduct. And this happened. And on some level, it's not surprising. Either one could be true. It could, both factors could come into play in this situation. And what maybe makes it worse is the suspicion of instability within the party. To what extent that is at play with regards to this situation, I don't know. But let's not forget now, one of the hallmarks of the PNM is the reopening of Balize House. And when they were celebrating the reopening of Balize House, they had a video that basically tried to show dueling buildings that was called Balize House, because the quote-unquote, the rhetorically speaking, Taj Mahal being constructed next to Balize House was also supposed to be Balize House. So when Balize House was reopened, that building, I don't think it even had walls yet. There might have still been a metal frame. Or if it had walls, it was bare concrete bricks. It wasn't by any means finished. This is a political party that essentially, I'm saying, I suspect, had internal division on the construction of its own party headquarters. So what is a sports day or a family day or any sort of day when compared to that? And the reason why I'm somewhat comfortable saying it, because I've mentioned this before, they basically exposed it on the video presentation at the reopening of Baldese House with how they edited the video if you know what to look for. And if it wasn't intentional, well then the editor of that video and whoever wrote the script and whoever directed it made some very interesting choices. And it's not my fault that they decided to make some very interesting choices. So you have a party where you had a situation with regards to the party leader succession. You had a situation when it comes to the eventual decision on who will lead the party moving forward after a failed election, right? Where there was a lot of things up in the air. You had a pre-existing situation where seemingly you had different agendas with regards to Baldese House, and now you have to question who has what agenda, who is vying for position in the party moving forward, who's sitting at the back of the room, maybe sulking, I don't know, and going on individual trips to foreign nations, who's holding court with the press outside the Red House on their own and involving themselves in joint select committee matters while being members of parliament. Believe it or not, that what you said there about that, it bothers me. It might seem small. It might seem small to most of you. It doesn't seem small to me. How you treat your most vulnerable. Society will be judged by how it treats its most vulnerable. An entity will be judged not just by the big things, but how it executes the little things. How it takes care of the people on the lowest rung of the ladder. Because in any sort of entity, organization, operation, it's not just how you treat the boss and how you treat the people under the boss and how you treat the mid-level people. It's how you treat the people at the lowest end of the ladder. The maintenance workers, how you treat them, right? If it's a first come, first serve, it's a first come, first serve. If they were in 9th position, they're in 9th position. Now, is there something that we're not being told? Maybe. Maybe. But how you treat with a situation, even if you have a justifiable reason to act a certain way, to do a certain thing, it has to be comprehensive. It has to leave no room for doubt. It has to have a surety and finality to it. Maybe I'm getting one side of the story, there's another side. It doesn't help that the pre-existing narrative and assumptions and perceptions didn't really do anything to fight it when it mattered in the past. It's not my job to go necessarily digging for justifications now. So we'll see what comes out of that. Honestly, talking to politicians, I'll be frank. At times you wonder. At times you wonder, what is it that they actually want as politicians when they talk to the public, when they talk to the media, when they say anything that they say? Because it seems at best inconsistent. I got your number. If I get anything, I'll try and pass it on. Actually, I now got a message from, well, I now saw another message from ASP Arun. He was going to try to come on virtually. Now, I missed the message because I was live on air. But it just goes to show, once again, the dedication to duty. And perhaps maybe it's for the best that I missed the message. I didn't have to try to fight to come via Zoom while waiting to go to his appointment. Maybe it's best that he relaxes and not have to deal with whatever it is that being on TV, you know, he would have to deal with. But it just goes to show there are great examples in our society. Not everyone is going to be some sports giant, world record holder like Brian Charles Lara, Sir Brian Charles Lara. Not everyone has to be. Sometimes it's the people that keep the day-to-day society together. It's a shame we can't find a way to celebrate that. We have San Fernando line caller. Good morning, you're on here.
Morning, Sean.
Morning, morning.
Sean, I want to address something here that it's long in coming and trying to be going. Seem not to want to understand that we have to start to have a better waste management system in this Twin Island state. It's about recycling and dealing with the amount of garbage that is generated in this country, and we cannot continue to just think that a landfill is the answer. I would like Mr. Augustine, because it seems that Trinidad, on the Trinidad side, that is not a thought at all. I would like Mr. Augustine to try a recycling system into start with the schools and the hotels, and then kind of move to the general public. Because it is possible for us to reduce that we put on the landfills by recycling. There's a lot of stuff we can use, the paper, the plastics, the bottles, and I cannot understand why this country is not moving towards this, you know, Sean. I still can't understand it. And especially for Tobago, for 161 square miles. If it is that they intend to push tourism or to increase the amount of tourists on the island to compete with any one of those other islands of the Caribbean chain, they need to understand that the amount of garbage they're going to generate. If they want more cruise ships to come there, eventually cruise ships are going to want to offload some garbage on the island. So they have to start to understand that this is also part of tourism. Just like the airports, just like the marina they want to put down, this is also part of the tourism infrastructure, waste management. And I hope that he thinks about this and starts to implement something soon. Have a good day, Sean.
Thank you, caller. The first thing that came to mind when you said waste management, we need to take it more seriously or look into it more, do better at it, was unfortunately, cynically, added to the list. There's a lot of things that, you know, in a vacuum you could argue we should be prioritizing. But then now, when you combine it all together, which ones out of the list of priorities should we prioritize, because we can't do them all at once, right? Which one out of the list of things that we should prioritize? It's so long, we have to prioritize the priorities. Right? Now, in the long run, you are correct. There is one issue with recycling, particularly with plastics. It is exceptionally inefficient. Extremely inefficient, to the point where, first of all, new plastics is ridiculously cheap because the raw material is a byproduct, right? It's a gas, but it can't necessarily be used like what natural gas is used for. So that's one of the things that they used to just burn from oil wells. And certain manufacturing facilities or refining facilities in Texas, they just make the pellets to make plastic things as a byproduct that would cost them so much more to get rid of That's why they at times would burn it off, but I think there might be issues with burning it off as well, right? So they sell the raw materials really cheaply. That's one of the reasons that recycling plastic is very uneconomical. But then on top of that, recycling plastics is very inefficient in and of itself because, one, on some level, we're not geared to having our packaging and our plastic products being easily recyclable. And then two, you have instances where it's contaminated with stuff. And once it's contaminated with stuff, it's harder to then take that plastic, clean it as much as possible. You know, so it might have food stuff, it might have wrappers and whatever. Clean it up as much as possible, refine it as much as possible so it will just be plastic, right? And then you could turn that into something else. Now, the thing with new plastics is we use it in a lot of cases for important products where sanitation is important. Having a uncontaminated feel, like new syringes and the like. Plastic syringes, of course, being a bit more durable in a way than glass, right? So new medical products and the like, you certain things, it's by default clean. And you won't necessarily have that. You won't be able to use recycled plastic for certain things. Potentially the structure of it won't be quite as sound, so you can't use it for certain other things. You probably can't use it to, probably can't recycle plastic soft drink bottles to make more plastic soft drink bottles, right? The process to recycle it is, from what I understand, it might be more energy intensive, or maybe just because it's inefficient, there'll be a higher carbon footprint. So potentially, one of the things that I wish we never left or moved on from was glass bottles. But of course, that has its own reasons, right? But we still have glass beer bottles. So I don't know to what extent, I mean, I guess plastic soft drink bottles was cheaper, but glass soft drink bottles would be more easily recyclable. I imagine aluminum cans might be more easily recyclable. The styrofoam stuff, we did a push to move away from traditional styrofoam to more recyclable styrofoam. And the soft drink bottles, those two things are the big things in my mind. The other one would be plastic bags. Potentially, you might be able to make plastic bags out of recycled plastic, maybe. But again, is it plastic bags where you want to carry food? There's a lot of nuance that I don't know. But a lot of the technologies, they are just not efficient enough to be viable. But there's one thing that has promise. It's, I don't know how true it is. I don't know if it's a mama guy. But apparently there's a young man in Africa. You might have seen the viral video. He claims to be able to take plastic and break it down back into fuel. And if this is true, this might be the most viable way to recycle plastics. Because then, depending on the situation with the refining process, because you're breaking it down to that extent, you're not just leaving it into a hard physical substance, right? You might then be able to better separate it from the non-plastic materials, whatever it may be, biological or other non-living materials, right? Which would therefore make it more efficient to then get a use out of it. It's the contamination that in part makes the refining of plastics inefficient. But also the fact that when you take something that's already in a structure and you try and break it back down to make it into a new structure, it just might not have the same level of strength or structural integrity. So by going all the way to breaking down into fuel, and forgive me, I'm going to do a quick Google search. Obviously, I did not research all of this to answer your question, right? There are various methods to turn plastic into fuel. The problem, of course, is greenhouse gases, right? So there's no surefire bet. I would argue that recycling needs better technology, but the technology is not just in the process. The technology also, and this is something that we could look into and I believe we already did, right? The recyclable water bottles, they're thinner. So, I mean, at the very least, using less material, now to what extent can you break it down and use it for something, right? Maybe not for water bottles again, because again, contamination and the like. But to what extent you could break it down and use it for something else if we change the type of plastics we use. And this is where it's going to get heavy. Perhaps one of the things that we also have to look at is figuring out a way to not have labels on plastic bottles, or how to, when recycling, make the labels so that they will come off completely. So when you're trying to recycle the bottle, it's the bare bottle. And then the only consideration, hopefully, is to clean out whatever residue of it, the residue of whatever it was carrying inside, clean that out, right? So to make the plastic as basic as possible and to have all of the labeling and the wrapping be easily removable. Then you also have to take recycling seriously. One of the best kept secrets about certain nations and their recycling efforts, the recycling bins goes into landfills. It's not actually being recycled, right? I think even in Germany, the actual amount of recycling being done is not as much as you would think. So, but I think part of it has to be solved with the technology on the manufacturing side with regards to what are we doing with the packaging. What kind of packaging we're developing, how easy it is to recycle. And then we could also look at the recycling processes and the technology to carry out those processes. And the thing is, at the end of the day, green revolution is a slave to economics. Economics are a slave to the reality of people who cannot afford the green revolution. That's just the honest truth. People ain't going to pay extra for the soft drink, so the soft drink companies are not going to go the extra mile with the recycling process that might have an extra cost that they are going to pass on or want to pass on to the consumer. And the consumers ain't going to pay that extra mile. They'll just stick with whichever soft drink company decides not to pivot. Because when you are concerned about food, shelter, clothing, the environment is not at the top of your priorities. The environment, being concerned about the environment, unfortunately, this is human psychology, it's a luxury. According to one UN study, climate change was not even in the top 50 list of priorities in the world. Now, I'm not sure if it was by their determination of what's important or by the determination of what they believed or what they got a survey on from people around the world. But the prevailing point was when you have starving people in certain continents, they don't care about climate change. They're only concerned about trying to survive for the next week, the next month, the next year. Then talk to me about what's going to happen with my great-grandchildren that I don't have yet. That I might never have because I might not survive or my children might not survive. Do we need to work towards a solution in TNT? Yes. Is one readily available? My answer would be no. Do we have the capacity to develop it? On some level, the question is, how can we make the private sector and the profit incentive work for us? Right? And the hope would be that somebody else is doing the work and we could piggyback off of it, because we do have finite space and we do have a problem with styrofoam and plastics. But the recyclable styrofoam, they tried to do it with styrofoam, right? The government, I think it was before COVID. I can't remember, was it around COVID? It could have been before COVID. They tried to do it because I know someone who was working in that company. They tried to mandate more recyclable styrofoam containers, but there were issues with it, right? Because note, one of the things with a food container, it needs to be not just sanitized or clean, but it has to have a certain amount of structural integrity. Otherwise, you might end up not just inconveniencing the consumer, but potentially compromising the safety of the food that they now bought, right? I mean, at the end of the day, one of the tricks is we go with styrofoam containers, and then there's also a bag. So we kind of double dip in on the amount of waste produced with regards to takeout. I know Chinese takeout in the States would have some sort of cardboard or paper-based packaging, but then, you know, is there a wax layer and blah, 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 and what does that mean? Paper recycling, yeah, I understand that. I don't think paper recycling is, I don't know what's in the landfill, but the thing is, I don't necessarily see paper in the waters, by the beaches, by the ports, in the rivers, and so on, right? But paper recycling could be something. Also, by the way, obviously metal recycling, well, that's a whole other question with the scrap iron dealers and so on and so on. I would have preferred if we moved away from soft drink plastic bottles back to glass and more on cans, assuming cans are, I believe, more easily recyclable. Maybe I'm wrong. And then, of course, it's what's available locally. Are we going to invest locally? Do we have the capital to invest locally? If the profit incentive is not enough, the private sector isn't going to invest locally. And again, if the government says, well, we'll tax you for it, they'll pass on those costs to the consumers, is that going to be viable right now in this economy? Don't know. So this is one of those situations where you have a valid issue. It is between a rock and a hard place, because I don't think there's any good solution. We have been talking about recycling for a couple of decades now. And everything I've seen about recycling is it doesn't work as well as you think, and it doesn't work as well as we would like, and it doesn't work as well as we need. Maybe we have to cut off the cheap plastic, but then you have to cut off the oil and gas sector. It's a byproduct that has no other value, and essentially they are selling it cheap so that someone would take it off of their hands. And that's part of the challenge. But yeah, that landfill situation, the flip side is you're right. Things not working. And we need to try and figure out a change. But where now are you going to prioritize it? Are you going to prioritize it over the education system, healthcare, national security? And we'll end things there. Thanks to the callers. This is talking about a WESN, the content capital, reminding you to stay safe, remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. And you know, one of the things that I liked about these last 2 episodes, the callers called in, they had issues that they brought to the forefront that had wider societal implications. More people need to speak out about issues. And Talking Point is a vessel where you could take advantage of it, bring your own issue to the table, let's hash it out. You know, my opinion on recycling is not the be-all and end-all. This is a conversation that could continue again and again and again, right? And let's have it. Part of it, though, is it's not just enough for the morning shows to have a guest, interview them on a topic, the audience goes, yes, that's interesting, and then goes about the day. Part of the audience calling in and bringing things up that matters to them, being invested in the situation and then participating in it. We need to see more of that across the board, not just with Talking Point, but with any morning show, with any local talk show, radio show, letters to the editor, any avenue of public discourse, social media, any avenue where public opinion and sentiment can be expressed and displayed should be engaged with by the members of the public as much as possible, because on some level that is part of what it means to be a democracy. A democracy is not just having the right to vote. A democracy is having the right to participate in choosing the direction of your country and then participating in it. Just having the right and holding on to the rights is meaningless. Actually practicing your rights, not just in the voting booth when there's an election, but practicing your democratic rights as a citizen of a free society, of a democracy, That's what it means. Because if the people are not willing to voice their will, but you complain that it feels like we're under dictatorship. Yes, because we leave the politicians to their own devices. We don't express ourselves. If they ignore us once, then it's we being too weak. We are the ones not strong enough. Don't be afraid to hammer your message time and time again. Be a reoccurring decimal. Be a pest if you have to, not in the criminal sense, but in the annoying won't go away sense. And you don't have to be a champion for every issue. You be a champion for what matters to you. Somebody else will be a champion for what matters to them. Let's all just be respectful of everyone's opinion. And when the time is right, let the leadership present to us what they think are the priorities. And if we all agree with that, then we're off to the races. And if you think our leaders ain't qualified for that level of responsibility, I have some bad news for you. We picked the wrong leaders. But I liked the callers calling in and voicing their opinions on other things. I love it when you engage with the topics we have as well, don't get me wrong. But bringing up a wider discourse to the nation's needs is important as well. Now the question is, are you going to limit the talking point? And will it just be limited to the audience of Talking Point? I can only influence who watches the show. You could influence who listens to you. And if we all do it, maybe more people will be more concerned and will speak out more and will be more engaged and will be seeking out more information to be better informed. And then we will show what our natural Trinbagonian intelligence, intellectual capacity, spirit, what could be born from that when we engage ourselves fully. Stay safe. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Don't forget it's nice to be nice. Have a good day. We'll see each other tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN